Okay, so as usual, we'll start with some prayers and then do some meditation. So at the end of the class last week, I started talking about the next group of the 37 harmonies, which are the 5 powers. And I'll continue talking about those tonight. But I thought it would be helpful to meditate on one of these 5 powers just to get a better understanding of them. And the first of the 5 is the power of faith. So, faith is a very important aspect of our practice. I thought it could be helpful to meditate on that. So, let's begin by, as we recite the prayers, if you can, visualize in front of you the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, all made of light. So his body, his robes, the seat he's sitting on, everything, every aspect of the visualization is made of light. So it's transparent, bright, radiant. And the whole visualization emanates a feeling of peace and purity and compassion and love. So the Buddha understands our mind, understands our thoughts and our feelings. He knows what's in our heart, what we really wish for deep down inside is peace and happiness. And he knows how we can achieve that. He's achieved it himself. And so he's there to teach us, guide us, and help us as we follow this path to achieving genuine peace and happiness, which is free of all suffering and all causes of suffering, especially ignorance about the true nature of things and all the afflictive states of mind that torment us, create so much suffering in our lives, and keep us stuck in samsara, dying and taking rebirth again and again. So Buddha knows how it's possible to be free of this situation that we're in and how to reach the perfect peace and happiness of enlightenment he has achieved. So feel that Buddha is someone you can really turn to for help, for guidance, to fulfill your deepest wishes and needs. And while reciting the prayers, if you wish, you can imagine all other sentient beings around you, or just feel that they are there. Wish that all other living beings could generate this interest in spiritual practice and want to learn and follow this path that leads to peace and happiness and freedom from suffering. You can imagine them all around us, reciting the prayers and receiving the benefit of the prayers along with us. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then while we recite the mantra of the Buddha, imagine light flowing from the form of the Buddha in front of you. The light represents his qualities and realizations, his compassion and love and wisdom and our entire body becomes suffused with this light, and it also fills our mind. Imagine it purifies our negative karma, our afflictions and obscurations, all the things that cause suffering. All of those get purified, become non-existent. And the light also nourishes our positive potential, our basic qualities of compassion and love and wisdom, so that they can grow, become stronger, more developed, and help us get closer to enlightenment. Kaya ta om mune mune maha munaye soha. 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 So sit quietly for a few minutes to make sure your mind really settles down in the present, the here and now. Put aside thoughts of the past, the future, other places. And then to ensure that what we're doing here tonight is of the greatest possible benefit for ourselves, for others, for the world, generate a altruistic motivation. If you already generated one earlier today, you can refresh that, bring that back into your mind. Otherwise, just bring into your heart, into your mind, the wish to benefit others, to relieve their suffering, to help them achieve genuine peace and happiness, and then wanting to learn about the Buddhist path to enlightenment so that you can follow this path and make your life, your existence, as beneficial for others, both now and in a long-term sense. Okay, so let's do a meditation on the power of faith. So, faith is one of the virtuous mental factors. And so, just by its very nature, it's virtuous. And what it means to be virtuous is it's the cause of happiness. So, virtue is what brings happiness, and that's what we want. So, if we can generate more and more faith in our mind, then we're creating the cause for greater and greater happiness. And also, any action that we do motivated by faith becomes a virtuous action. So, faith is a very important part of our spiritual life. So, bring to mind some of your early experiences of learning about Buddhism. You may have learned from reading books, listening to teachings, meeting spiritual teachers and practitioners who you found inspiring. So your faith in the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, was born during those experiences. And the fact that you are still here wanting to learn and practice Buddhism means that you have been sustained by that faith all this time. Although it's natural that there are times when our faith lags, gets kind of weak, we may experience doubts and a lack of faith. So that's not something to feel bad about or surprised about, because even bodhisattvas, who are on the first two levels of the path of preparation, when they're not meditating, can sometimes have a lack of faith. So if it happens to us, it's nothing to feel bad about. We shouldn't feel bad or ashamed. And it can be helpful to recall that all the mental factors, including faith and doubt, are impermanent phenomena. They arise in dependence on causes and conditions. They last a moment, change, disappear. So they come and go in our mind. That's just their nature. But if we work on creating the causes and conditions for faith, then we will experience more faith and less doubt. So see if you can feel interested in doing that, creating the causes to have more faith in your mind. And one of the causes of faith is learning, increasing our knowledge of the Dharma. The more we understand the Buddha's teachings, the more we will feel certain, convinced about them. And also, not just learning the Dharma, but practicing it, putting it into practice and experiencing the results in our life. So as we learn more and do more meditation, we gain greater faith in the Dharma. For example, the Four Noble Truths, the Four Truths of Aryas, the suffering nature of our existence in samsara, how suffering is caused by afflictions and karma, how it's possible to end suffering by overcoming afflictions and karma, getting rid of them, and attaining true cessations, the third truth. And the way to do this is by attaining true paths, which are realizations in the mind, especially the direct realization of emptiness. There's many other realizations or understandings we can develop that will lead us to that realization of emptiness, which is not easy to get to. So the faith that initially got us interested in the Dharma needs to be sustained and not lost. And it also needs to be strengthened and stabilized. And so we can do this by continuing to learn and practice. Our faith grows stronger. And eventually it becomes the power of faith. So the power of faith is a very strong, well-developed, stable kind of faith that is able to overcome its opposite, the lack of faith or uncertainty, so that that no longer arises when we're in meditation, although it might still arise when we're out of meditation. Try to imagine there will be a point in the future where you will have that kind of faith, the power of faith. And then when our faith is developed even more, becomes stronger, more stable, it becomes another level of faith, which is called the strength of faith. We'll look at this later. But this stronger form of faith prevents its opposite, the lack of faith, from arising in our mind all the time, whether we're meditating or out of meditation. So imagine what that would be like. Even if you encounter a person who's a follower of another religion, and this person talks to you in a very energetic and maybe even charismatic way about their beliefs, which are very different from Buddhist beliefs. And they might even criticize Buddhist views, saying they are wrong, and if you believe in those views, you will go to hell forever. So even if you encounter somebody like that, your mind won't be shaken. It will remain calm, stable, free of doubt, uncertainty. Your faith will be very, very strong, unshaken, no matter what this person says. So if we keep practicing, following the path, developing our faith, that will be the experience we will have one day. So see if you can conclude the meditation by having the determination to continue cultivating positive, virtuous mental factors like faith, because of understanding the great value, the great benefit they will bring to yourself and to all other living beings. So that's just the first of the 5 powers. And last week I talked about them in a rather quick way. So I thought it'd be good to go back and go through those 5 powers again. So if we could have the slides on the screen. So again, this is these 5 powers are included in the 37 harmonies. There are 5 of those 37 harmonies with enlightenment, and the 37 harmonies are all qualities that help us reach enlightenment. In fact, we need them to attain enlightenment. So here, this is just a general explanation of the 5 powers. And keep in mind that the term power in Buddhism can mean different things. For example, we talk about the sense powers, like the eye sense power, ear sense power. This is a subtle type of form within the eye, within the ear, that enables us to perceive objects, visual objects, sounds, and so on. So those are also called powers. And there's other uses of the term power. So here, it's specifically called power within the 37 harmonies. Among the 37 harmonies, there are these 5 powers. So this is a sort of definition. A power within the 37 harmonies is an exalted knower, meaning it's a realization in the mind of someone who's on the path, someone who's quite highly accomplished. And it says that is independently able to generate its result, an Arya path. So the powers themselves are realizations, but they enable us to attain higher realizations, the realizations of Arya beings. So Aryas are those who attain the direct realization of emptiness. They're on the path of seeing, so quite highly accomplished. So power leads to the realizations of Aryas. And then the second bullet point says they are called powers because they empower us to attain enlightenment. So that's the ultimate goal that we are trying to achieve. And the term enlightenment doesn't only refer to Buddhahood, the state that the Buddha achieved, which is what we aspire to attain. In the Mahayana tradition, we aspire to become like the Buddha. But enlightenment, the term enlightenment can also be used to refer to nirvana. That's also called enlightenment. So there's different kinds of enlightenment. But whatever kind of enlightenment one wants to achieve, whether it's nirvana or Buddhahood, these powers are necessary causes for that. So they have to be developed by everybody. Then the last bullet point says they are fully attained on the heat and peak levels of the path of preparation. So the path of preparation is the second of the 5 paths that one goes through. A path is actually itself, it's a mind, a realization, not a physical thing that you're walking on, traveling on, but it's a mental path, a realization in the mind. So the path of preparation is the second of the 5 paths. And does anyone remember what's the beginning point of the path of preparation? What is it you attain that enables you to enter the path of preparation? More than that. Sorry? Yeah. So prior to the path of prior to the path of preparation, you already develop a realization, an inferential realization of emptiness, and you also develop calm abiding or serenity, and then you put those things together, you have the union. So when you have that union of calm abiding and special insight into emptiness, that's the starting point of the path of preparation, the point at which you are on the path of preparation. And then there's 4 stages of the path of preparation. As your realization of emptiness becomes stronger, more pure, and you're moving gradually to the direct non-conceptual realization of emptiness. That's the path of seeing, the next path. So you have there are 4 stages that you pass through as you're approaching the path of seeing. So the first 2 stages are called heat and peak. So on those 2 levels of the path of preparation, that's when these 5 powers are fully attained. So let's look at the 5 powers. It's on the next slide. So they're all mental factors. The first is the power of faith. So that's what we just meditated on. And so faith is a virtuous mental factor. So many ordinary people have faith, whether they've entered a path or not. But here it's the power of faith. So the power of faith is in the mind of someone who's at least on one of the 5 paths. And it's specifically said to be conviction regarding the 4 Noble Truths. So in the book Following the Buddhist Footsteps, it says that this power of faith refers to the faith of conviction, because there's different kinds of faith, and some kinds of faith are more emotional. Like you see the Dalai Lama, for example, and you just feel, wow, he's so incredible. He has so many wonderful qualities. You just feel really inspired by him. So that's one kind of faith. Then another kind of faith is where you go further than that. You not only admire that person, but you want to be like them yourself. So you want to emulate that person, like the Dalai Lama. You want to have those same qualities yourself. So it's still kind of emotional. Those types of faith are more emotional. But then this third type of faith, which is sometimes called the faith of conviction or the faith of belief, this comes about when you really investigate. You do investigation and analysis. You really check the teachings, think about them, ask questions, overcome doubts. So you reach a point where you're really convinced in the teachings, like the 4 Noble Truths. And they say that's the best kind of faith because it can't be shaken. Even if you meet somebody who tries to talk you out of your beliefs, you're not shaken by that. Your belief is very, very firm. So the type of faith here and the power of faith is that kind of faith. It's conviction. So it has confidence and trust in the path of practice and also in the resultant liberation or full awakening. Yeah, so in Buddhism, like in some religions, when they talk about faith, it's more like faith in a person, like faith in God or faith in Jesus or faith in Allah. But in Buddhism, faith can be in a person like the Buddha, but it can also be in the teachings, like the Four Noble Truths. You know, you're convinced that those four truths are truths. They really are true. And so that motivates you to practice, to overcome the first two truths, suffering and its causes, to achieve the second two truths, cessations and paths. And I also talk like for in the practice of serenity or calm abiding, they say we need to have faith in the value of that particular state of mind. If I have calm abiding, if I have serenity, oh, I'll be, you know, it'll be so good for this reason and that reason. So you learn about that, you contemplate that, and you generate strong faith in calm abiding, and then that gives you the energy to practice and achieve it. Yeah, so faith can be in doctrines, also in attainments, realizations that we wish to attain. So faith is said to be the basis of all virtuous qualities. When we have faith, our mind is joyful, inspired, enthusiastic. Yeah. So I think we all have some appreciation of faith, but we need to work on it and make sure that it's strong and stable so that it doesn't get easily shaken or shattered, depending on what we hear from other people, what we experience in our life. Okay, so then the second power is the power of joyous effort, or sometimes it's just called effort. So joyous effort is also a virtuous mental factor. It's explained as taking delight in virtue. So it's when we are joyful, enthusiastic, happy to do things that are virtuous, that are positive. That's the meaning of joyous effort. That's also one of the perfections, the fourth perfection. So here, the power of joyous effort says delights in discarding true sufferings and true origins. So the first two truths, sufferings themselves and the origins of suffering, afflictions and karma. So we want to get rid of those, and we're happy to do the work that needs to be done to overcome those two truths. And then also there's joyous effort to adopt the second two truths, to develop true cessations and true paths. So that's the meaning of the power of effort, joyous effort. So this is also really, really important to be able to develop virtuous qualities and make progress on the path. If we have no effort, it's like fuel that enables us to travel, move along the path. It opposes laziness. And then the third power is the power of mindfulness. So mindfulness, again, is a mental factor. It's not a virtuous mental factor. It's neutral, neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. But if we are practicing mindfulness in the context of our practice, with the aspiration to become enlightened, help all living beings, then it becomes virtuous. So the power of mindfulness here means it doesn't forget the objects of observation and the aspects of the Four Noble Truths. So mindfulness in general is the mental factor that keeps something in mind. It's the opposite of forgetfulness. So instead of forgetting something like, oh, the Four Noble Truths, we keep them in mind and continue focusing on them and practicing them. So, yeah, everybody has mindfulness. So even ordinary beings who aren't practicing meditation, mindfulness, I think, is still there in people's lives. For example, if they have a job and they have to remember what time they have to be at work and where they have to go to be at work and so on, mindful that they have to bring their kids to the school or the childcare centers or whatever. So keeping in mind their responsibilities, the things that they have to do, the bills they have to pay, and so on. So I think that that's mindfulness, kind of a neutral, not necessarily virtuous mindfulness. So I think everybody does have mindfulness to a certain extent, but in the practice, mindfulness mainly means keeping in mind the objects of our practice, the things that we want to meditate on and put into practice, such as the Four Noble Truths. Okay, and then following Buddha's footsteps says that for Mahayana practitioners, those of us who want to follow the Bodhisattva path and become enlightened, mindfulness is also conjoined with bodhicitta, the wish to benefit others. So when we're practicing, meditating on, focusing on the Four Noble Truths, we're doing it not just for our own sake, but for the sake of others. Then fourth is the power of meditative stabilization. That's another term for concentration. So different translators like to translate it differently. So it's concentration or meditative stabilization, samten in Tibetan. So this is a single pointed mind focused on the Four Noble Truths without distraction. So again, this is the concentration of a person who is on the path. They have, by that time, very strong concentration. Following the Buddha's footsteps says, on the basis of mindfulness, so mindfulness is what helps us to have concentration. So mindfulness doesn't let us forget the object, and then our mind becomes more and more familiar with that object and learns how to stay on it for longer and longer periods of time. So mindfulness helps us generate concentration. So on the basis of mindfulness, single-pointed concentration, focused on the Four Noble Truths, is attained. Then, fifth power is the power of wisdom. And this one discriminates the mode of abidance of the Four Noble Truths. So following the Buddha's footsteps says, from concentration, the fourth power, comes the penetrative wisdom that individually discriminates the features and qualities of the Four Noble Truths, as well as their ultimate mode of existence or emptiness. So it understands the Four Noble Truths both on the conventional level, like suffering, for example, all the different kinds of suffering and the origins of suffering, all the different types of origins of suffering. So it understands them on the conventional level, all the details of them, but it also understands their ultimate nature, how they were all empty of inherent existence or true existence. So that's the meaning of the true mode of abidance of the Four Noble Truths. So again, these are all mental factors: faith, joyous effort, mindfulness, meditative stabilization. And ordinary people who aren't on a path and maybe who aren't even practicing can have these mental factors, just ordinary mental factors. But here we're talking about the power of these, power of faith, power of joyous effort. So that's like a more developed form of those mental factors. And they're in the mind of someone who's on the path. And it's said that these 5 powers have the ability to oppose their opposites. So there's an opposite state of mind to each of these. So let's see if we can figure out those. What's the opposite of faith? What would be opposite of faith? Well, it's actually said to be lack of faith. Among the 20 secondary afflictions, when you go through all the different mental factors in the study of Lorik. So there's 6 root afflictions and then 20 secondary or auxiliary afflictions. So one of those is called non-faith. And I looked it up. I can't remember by heart its definition, but anyway, non-faith is said to be a type of ignorance that doesn't believe in or doesn't have admiration for things that are worthy of admiration, like the Buddha. Okay, so because of ignorance, one just has a lack of faith, a lack of admiration for the Buddha or the Dharma or any object that deserves faith. And it's said to be the basis for laziness and disrespect. Yeah, so if you don't have faith, then you're lazy. You don't feel like practicing because you don't believe in the Buddha, you don't believe in his teachings, you don't believe in the path. So you don't even try to practice. And then you also don't have respect. That very beautiful feeling of respect for those who are worthy of respect, like the Buddha, like the teachers, like the Sangha, and so on. And then opposite to joyous effort, the second one, what would be the opposite to that? Laziness, our old friend. Laziness is also a secondary affliction. So it's afflicted state of mind, and it's a big hindrance to the path because there's different kinds of laziness, but in general, they stop us from engaging in practice and doing things that are virtuous. And so if we don't practice and we don't create virtue, we're not going to get the results. We just remain stuck where we are. And then mindfulness, the opposite of mindfulness would be forgetfulness. Yes, forgetting. And it doesn't just mean forgetting people's names and where you put your car keys, but forgetting objects that are virtuous, that we should keep our mind focused on, like when we're meditating. We need to have an object that we're meditating on and stay focused on that object. So forgetfulness causes us to forget that object and get distracted by other things. Also, our precepts and other practices we're trying to do in our daily life, we can forget those and then mess up, break precepts or do things that are non-virtuous. So this is what happens with forgetfulness. We forget to create virtue. We forget to keep our precepts. So mindfulness is the opposite of that. And then the fourth one, meditative stabilization or concentration. What's the opposite to that? Yeah, distraction. So distraction is also a secondary affliction. So when our mind wanders away, gets distracted from our object of meditation, then interferes with concentration. And wisdom, opposite to wisdom. Yes. Ignorance. Yeah. So ignorance is a root affliction. That's one of the root afflictions. And there's many different kinds of ignorance. So yeah. And there's also many different kinds of wisdom. But in general, yeah, wisdom and ignorance are the opposite. So these 5 powers then are like remedies or antidotes to 5 different afflictive states of mind. So when we cultivate these 5 powers, then we're developing the strength to be able to overcome, to stop those 5 afflictions: lack of faith, laziness, forgetfulness, distraction, and ignorance. And so it is said that for a person who's on the first 2 levels of the path of preparation, heat and peak levels, when these 5 powers are manifest in their mind during meditation, and all 5 of them can be present simultaneously. It's not that you have them one after the other, but they can all be there together at the same time in their mind when they're meditating. So the result of that is that these opposite states of mind, lack of faith, laziness, and so on, simply don't arise. They won't arise during meditation. But they could still arise when you're out of meditation. So when you finish your meditation and you go and do other things, then it's possible you might have lack of faith, laziness, forgetfulness, and so on. So those opposite states of mind could still arise outside of meditation. So like I said, during the meditation, that means even a bodhisattva who's on the path of preparation, at least these first 2 levels, could still have lack of faith, could still have laziness. I don't know how often, depends on the bodhisattva. But yeah, when I learned that, I thought, well, I shouldn't feel so bad if I have them. If even such high-level bodhisattvas have them, then of course people like us who haven't even entered the first path, we still have them. So again, we shouldn't beat ourselves up. I used to do that. When I would have doubt, or my faith would sort of get weak and lag and not be very strong, then I'd get really unhappy with myself, feel bad about myself. But yeah, I don't think that helps. And it's also not right. It does take time to develop the power of faith that is able to overcome the lack of faith. Okay, so that's one group of the among the 37 harmonies. And then the next group are called the 5 strengths. And these are the same 5 mental factors that we just looked at, but they are like a more a stronger form of them, a more developed form of them. Yeah, so again, it's faith, joy, effort, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom, but stronger forms of these mental factors that cannot be shaken at all by their opposites: lack of faith, laziness, and so forth. And I put the Sanskrit and Tibetan terms up at the top, just for those of you who might be interested in that, because different translators will translate these terms differently. So the materials I've been using from the FPMT study programs, they translate the first group, the 5 powers, as powers, and then this group as strengths, top in Tibetan. But in the book Following in Buddha's Footsteps, they're translated differently. The first group are called the 5 faculties, And this group are called the five powers. So, yeah, that's why it is useful if you know the Tibetan or the Sanskrit terms. You can go back to that and figure out what they're talking about. Okay, so it's the same five mental factors, and stronger forms of them. I was thinking maybe an analogy might be chili sauce. You have different kinds of chili sauce. You have very mild chili sauce, and then you have medium mild, medium spicy. What do you call it? Spicy, yeah. Mild, and then spicy, and then very spicy, depending on how much chili has been added. So maybe it's a bit like that with these five mental factors. You have just very ordinary levels of faith and joyous effort and so on. And then you have a stronger level, like the previous group, the five powers. That's like a stronger, spicier form of the five mental factors. And then this group, this five strengths, is even stronger, more spicy. So at this point, when you have the five strengths, they are so well developed, so strong that the opposites of them cannot come up even outside of meditation. So they don't arise during meditation, but even when the person is out of meditation, walking around, talking to people, doing things, watching TV, whatever, even in those situations, they will not experience manifest forms of the opposites, lack of faith, laziness, and so on. So these are attained. The second bullet point says they're in the chart showing the different groups of 37 harmonies. These are called paths that connect to clear realization. So they're bringing us closer to having the clear realizations of the Arya stage. And they are fully attained on the last two levels of the path of preparation. So the last two levels of the path of preparation are called forbearance. This is not the third one. And then the fourth one is called supreme mundane quality. So on those levels, one is getting closer to the path of seeing, meaning closer to the direct realization of emptiness. So it's on those two levels that one has these five strengths. And so the last bullet point says, on those two levels, manifest non-faith, laziness, forgetfulness, distraction, and ignorance do not arise even when one is outside of meditation. So it's because these five virtuous mental factors have become really, really, really strong. They're able to suppress the opposites. So that would, it's nice to think about that and try to imagine what that would be like to never, even when you're not meditating, to never experience lack of faith or laziness or forgetfulness of virtuous objects, distraction from your object of meditation, ignorance. So those don't even arise. It's not that they've been abandoned, because when you're on the path of preparation, you still haven't completely abandoned any afflictions. That only happens on the next path, the path of seeing. So you haven't completely abandoned the afflictions, but they're very much under control. So they're not like popping up in the mind and making our mind crazy. And then in following the Buddha's footsteps, there's a quotation from one of Nagarjuna's texts called A Letter to a Friend, where he encourages us to practice the 5 powers and the 5 strengths. And so he says, with faith, effort, and mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom, 5 in all, you must strive hard to reach the highest state. As powers, these faculties take you to the peak. They take us to the peak, meaning our ultimate goal, enlightenment. So, you know, in the context of like 37 harmonies, they're talking about a quite high level of these 5 mental factors. But we have them, at least sometimes, and, you know, they're not so strong and they're not always present, but we do have them. And so it's good to learn about these mental factors and work on cultivating them, strengthening them, developing them more and more. And one day they will reach the point of being like the 5 powers and the 5 strengths. So any questions about these before we move on? Dunya?
Are those 5 strengths the reason why when they reach forbearance on the path of preparation, the bodhisattvas don't have rebirths in lower realms anymore?
I can't remember what is the exact cause for bodhisattvas. Yeah, that is one of the features of that, the 3rd level of the path of preparation, that there's no more rebirth in the 3 lower realms. I can't remember if it's, yeah, what is the cause of that or the reason for that? I'm sure, yeah, these have something to do with it, but probably other things as well. I'll look it up and get back to that next time.
How is faith a virtuous mental factor? Because you can have faith in negative things.
Well, yeah, that's a good question. But the way that faith is defined, let me just look up the definition of faith. It seems to exclude faith in things that don't have good qualities. Let me just look up. Okay, so this is from Asanga's Compendium of Knowledge. He says, faith is a conviction, clarity, and wishing with respect to an existent, something that exists, that is endowed with excellent qualities and powers. So the way I think of it is, if somebody had faith in Osama bin Laden, maybe. Well, I think that happened. Yeah, people had incredible devotion to him and following him and thought he was a great person and so on, but he was a murderer, terrorist. So I don't think that would be called faith. That would not be this mental factor. Okay, so it's only faith when the object that one has faith in really does have good qualities, excellent qualities. Does that make sense? So, yeah, whatever feeling one has towards Osama bin Laden, that where you think, wow, he's great, he's fantastic, I want to follow him. You could, I suppose it's some other mental factor, but I don't know which one. But yeah, it wouldn't be faith, because faith is always virtuous, and being the meaning of virtue is it's the cause of happiness. So if you're following Osama bin Laden and committing acts of terrorism, committing mass murders, you're definitely not creating the cause for happiness. You're creating the cause for suffering. Yeah, so faith should be something that motivates us to create virtue and things that will definitely be the cause of happiness, both within samsara and also beyond samsara. Does that make sense? Anyone else? So I would like to move on to the next group of the 37 harmonies. So this is that chart we've seen before showing the 7 groups of the 37 harmonies. So we've covered the first 5 groups, the 4 close placements of mindfulness, the 4 correct abandonings, 4 legs of magical emanation, the 5 powers, the 5 strengths. So the next group, number 6, are the 7 branches of enlightenment, also known as the 7 awakening factors. And I thought I would use that latter term, awakening factors, just because it's shorter and easier to say. I'm lazy. But the term for these in both Pali and Sanskrit and Tibetan does seem to have the meaning of like a branch or a limb. Bhante Gunaratana says they are the arms and legs of enlightenment. They enable us to travel to that goal of enlightenment. So it'd be very difficult to travel anywhere if you didn't have arms and legs. So yeah, so then in this chart, the second column, the description says these are paths of clear realization. And it seems that the term clear realization probably in this context refers to Arya paths, because in the last column, the full attainment of these happens on the path of seeing, which is the Arya path. So, of course, one is developing these 7 before the path of seeing, but they are fully attained on the path of seeing. That's in the Mahayana tradition. So it's said that these are actually paths of Aryas. These are realizations in the minds of Aryas. But in the Pali tradition, it's not so clear if they have to be Arya paths or not. Seems like they might exist before that. So let's look at these 7. Next slide. So the reason they're called branches of enlightenment or awakening factors is because they're causes. They're causes that bring us closer to enlightenment. We have to develop these 7 in order to achieve enlightenment or awakening. There are also antidotes to various afflictions and hindrances, the things that cause suffering and prevent us from attaining enlightenment. And in a book by Joseph Goldstein on the Satipatthana Sutra called Mindfulness, he says that the Buddha gave a lot of teachings on these 7 factors. For example, one thing the Buddha said was, this is a quote from the Buddha, "I do not see even one thing that, when developed and cultivated, leads to the abandoning of the things that fetters so effectively as these 7. So the Buddha is saying, I can't find anything else that's better for overcoming the afflictions, the things that keep us stuck in samsara, as these 7. And in a book by Bhante Gunaratana, he says there are cases where at the time of the Buddha, where somebody was very, very sick, very, experiencing a lot of suffering, a lot of pain. And just by hearing these 7 factors mentioned, the person felt better. Yeah, so just, the Buddha just mentioned these 7 different factors, and the person suddenly got out of their sickness. Maybe we should take it over to our friends in Gautami and recite them to them. So here's a list of the 7. Mindfulness, number 1, investigation, number 2. Number 2 is also called discrimination of phenomena. Those are alternate translations of that one. And number 3 is effort or energy. Could also be called joyous effort. It's the same mental factor. And then number 4 is joy. Number 5 is pliancy. 6, concentration. 7, equanimity. So some of you might be thinking, but didn't we already encounter some of these before? I've heard that before. Mindfulness and effort, concentration. So those were already, on some of the other lists of, factors of the 37 harmonies. So it is true. There are certain mental factors that appear in more than one of the groups of the 37 harmonies, but they are designated differently. So for example, mindfulness, the first of these. So, among the 7, there's 7 groups that 37 harmonies are divided into, and the first of those groups is the 4 establishments of mindfulness. Okay, so there it's called establishment of mindfulness. And then in the 5 powers and the 5 strengths, mindfulness is in those groups as well, but it's the power of mindfulness, the strength of mindfulness. And now here it's the awakening factor of mindfulness. So that's how they're referred to. And so to be really precise, one should use the whole term. So in all of these different groups, it's mindfulness. It's the same basic mental factor of mindfulness, but it's at a different stage of development. And I thought, we could understand this by just taking an ordinary analogy, like a person. Let's say there's a person named Sally. And when Sally is a child, she's not very developed physically and mentally. She has a small body, and she has to go to school and learn lots of things, and she spends a lot of time playing with her friends. And then later, when she's in her late teens, she's going to university, and there she's, physically more developed and also mentally more developed and gaining more knowledge and more skills. And then still later, she graduates from university and gets a job and starts taking, more responsibilities, learning more things, gaining more experiences, and so on. And then still later in her life, maybe when she's in her 40s, by that time she's CEO of her company, or able to train others and guide others and so on. So it's the same person, basically, Sally, but at different stages of her life, at different stages of her development. And, the older she gets, the more experiences she has, the more she learns, then she becomes more capable of doing different things. So the child Sally and the 40-year-old Sally are quite different in what they're able to do. So it's similar with a mental factor like mindfulness. Like I said before, Even ordinary people have mindfulness. People who aren't even learning and practicing Dharma, they have mindfulness, but it's not so well developed. And there's lots of times when they don't have mindfulness, when they're very unmindful. But then we start to practice, we start to cultivate mindfulness, and it gets stronger and more developed. We're able to keep it going longer. And then as you progress along the path, your mindfulness grows even more, becomes more strong, more developed, more capable. And you even get to the point where you can be mindful like all day long. You don't lose it at all. So it's the same mental factor all along, but becoming stronger and more developed and more capable of overcoming afflictive states of mind. Does that make sense? There's one. Oh.
The last two categories were progressively higher. Is this also higher?
Yeah.
So these are more developed than in the powers and the strengths.
Yeah, because if you look at where they are fully attained, the strengths, the powers were on the first two levels of the path of preparation. The strengths were on the second two levels of the path of preparation. And now these, the awakening factors, is the path of seeing. So now you're an Arya. You're someone who's directly realized emptiness. So your mindfulness and so on are really, really strong, very powerful.
Please speak a little about which kind of equanimity are
I'm
we
going to go
talking?
through these.
I
I'm
see.
just, yeah, we're just looking at
I
the
see.
list, but we're
Thank
going to go through them. So the next slide has just some general information, and this is from Jetsun Chuki Gelsen, although, yeah, so it's his commentary to the Ornament for Clear Realization, but the source of this information seems to be a Sangha's compendium of knowledge that he's quoting from. So the first bullet point here is a definition of an awakening factor. So what exactly is an awakening factor? So it's an exalted knower in an Arya's continuum. So that makes it clear that an awakening factor is found only in the mind of an Arya, someone who's directly realized emptiness. And it acts as the cause of the enlightenment that is its result. Yeah, I was wondering about the last part of that definition, and I thought maybe that is included to say it's the cause of the enlightenment that is its result, because in debate, somebody might say, oh, so the awakening factor in Venerable Manlam's mind can be the cause of the enlightenment in my mind. So if you leave it very general, if you say, an awakening factor is the cause of enlightenment. Well, whose enlightenment? Can it be, the awakening factor in one person's mind can be the cause of the enlightenment in another person's mind. I mean, in debate, they sometimes bring up all kinds of things like that. So I think maybe that last part of the sentence is just to make it really clear that, the awakening factor in one person's mind, like Venerable Manlam, is the cause of enlightenment in her mind and not in anybody else's mind. Second bullet point says, the purpose of cultivating them is to abandon all the objects of abandonment of the path of seeing without exception. So what are the objects of abandonment of the path of seeing? Anyone remember? No. Acquired afflictions, yeah. So prior to the path of seeing, one is not able to abandon any afflictions. One can just kind of suppress them, keep them under control, manage them, but you can't get rid of them. They're still there. The seeds of them are still there. So there's still the possibility that they could pop up and mess up your mind. So it's only when you reach the path of seeing with the direct realization of emptiness, that is like the antidote, the medicine that is able to eliminate afflictions. But you don't get rid of all afflictions at once. You start with a more gross level of afflictions, which are the acquired ones. So these are afflictions acquired by studying, learning. I mean, the traditional examples they give in the text are if you study some philosophy that teaches you the existence of a permanent, unitary, independent self, like you have a soul, you have a real permanent soul inside of you. So if somebody's exposed to that kind of teaching and they believe it, and then whatever afflictions they have arising from that kind of belief, that kind of view, would be acquired. So acquired means acquired by your learning, education. So those are more gross or coarse kinds of afflictions compared to the innate ones. The innate ones are there from beginningless time. We're born with them. So everybody is born with a certain amount of anger and attachment and ignorance and arrogance. And the origin of those is, well, there is no origin. They've been in our mind from beginningless time. We didn't have to learn them from anybody. We didn't, they don't come out, they're not part of our brain or our genes, but they're part of the mind from beginningless time. So those are much more subtle, much more deep, much more difficult to get rid of. And so those are abandoned gradually after the path of seeing. So as soon as you achieve the path of seeing, even the very first moment of the path of seeing, with that direct realization of emptiness, that is able to cut away, get rid of some of the afflictions, but only the acquired ones. So those are the objects of abandonment of the path of seeing. And so that's why we cultivate these awakening factors, is to clear away those objects of abandonment. And then the next bullet point says the objects of observation of the seven are the four truths of the Arya. So true suffering, true origins, true cessations, true paths. Those are the things that one is focusing on, meditating on. You might wonder, well, what about emptiness? I thought, to be an Arya, you have to meditate on emptiness and realize emptiness. Well, emptiness is included in the four truths of the Aryas. Does anyone remember where? Well, true cessations are, according to Prasangika, true cessations are emptinesses. But and yeah, true paths, the main true path is the wisdom directly realizing emptiness. But in terms of meditating on emptiness and getting a realization of emptiness, so it's actually in the first truth, true sufferings, because there's four aspects of true sufferings: impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and then empty and selfless. The last two are empty and selfless. And according to Prasangika, both empty and selfless refer to emptiness of inherent existence, true existence. So that's where one would be meditating on emptiness. So yeah, for Prasangika, that would be the main object that you're meditating on, but you also meditate on the others. You also meditate on impermanence and unsatisfactoriness. So those need to be realized as well. Okay, so there's a lot of material on these seven awakening factors, especially in the Theravada tradition, but because we don't have a lot of time, I can't cover all of it. So I thought to just share some information from following in the Buddha's footsteps, which is a kind of synthesis of both the Mahayana and the Pali traditions. So just to go through the seven and have a better understanding of them. So the next slide. Okay, so the first awakening, again, I'm calling them awakening factors, although they can also be called branches of enlightenment or factors of enlightenment, but this is just kind of a short, simple term, awakening factor. So the first one is the mindfulness awakening factor. So just a little bit of explanation about this. So when one is following the path, one has been cultivating mindfulness right from the beginning, like, you know, the four foundations of mindfulness, four establishments of mindfulness. So when one is practicing those, one is cultivating mindfulness, increasing mindfulness. So then when mindfulness becomes strong and continuous, like you're able to be mindful all the time, whatever you're doing, then it becomes the mindfulness awakening factor. So just to save space, I put AW. It's not the root beer. Isn't there root beer? AW? A&W. It's not that. So AW means awakening factor. Okay, so the mindfulness awakening factor is when your mindfulness is really strong and also continuously going all the time. And that enables us to control afflictions, keep the afflictions under control. And then it says, with the mindfulness awakening factor, the mind is thoroughly familiar with the four truths and can remain focused on them without being distracted by other objects. So by the time you have this, like you're on the path of seeing and you have the mindfulness awakening factor, you're very, very familiar with the Four Noble Truths. You've been doing a lot of meditation on them. You have a really good understanding of them, strong experience of them. So you're able to keep those in mind, keep your mind focused on them without forgetting them or being distracted by other objects. So it's like super strong, super powerful mindfulness. And then the second awakening factor, in some translations it's called investigation, but in the following Buddha's footsteps it's called discrimination of phenomena. So this follows on from mindfulness, because if you have strong mindfulness isn't just looking at like the body and feelings and so on, but investigating them, to understand them, to see them as impermanent and so forth. So with strong mindfulness focused on these different objects like the body, feelings, mind, phenomena, one is investigating and gaining wisdom. And this wisdom can be wisdom understanding impermanence, wisdom understanding emptiness, and so on. So understanding the true nature of these objects of our body and mind. But also the kind of wisdom we need to develop is knowing what to cultivate and what to abandon. So that has to do with our mind and mental factors. So as we're becoming more aware of our mind and the different kinds of mental states, mental factors arising in our mind, we become more clear about which ones are positive ones and things that we want to develop and have more of, like love, compassion, wisdom, mindfulness, concentration. So those are the things that will help us progress along the path. So we want to increase those, cultivate those. And then other mental factors are detrimental, causes of suffering. So anger and attachment and ignorance and arrogance and so on. So you're watching your mind and getting more familiar with these different mental factors and more clear about which ones you want to increase, which ones you want to get rid of or abandon. So that's what this awakening factor is all about, gaining wisdom, understanding which kinds of mental factors to cultivate, which ones to get rid of, to abandon. And then it also says this awakening factor directly realizes selflessness and thus destroys obscurations. So that's like the culmination of discrimination of phenomena. When you really understand how phenomena exist, you're realizing selflessness or emptiness. And that's the thing that is able to eliminate afflictions altogether. And then the next one, number 3, next slide, is the effort awakening factor. Also, you could call it joyous effort or energy. So this says, with refined discrimination of virtuous and non-virtuous mental states, one can strengthen the former and restrain the latter. So the previous awakening factor was discrimination of phenomena, and that enables us to know what we want to cultivate, what we want to abandon. We want to cultivate the virtuous, positive mental factors and abandon the negative ones. So when that kind of discrimination gets stronger, more refined, then one is able to actually do that. One can put one's effort into cultivating the virtuous, positive mental factors, abandoning, overcoming the non-virtuous ones. And so one is practicing in that way and getting the non-virtue under control. So you're much more able to manage non-virtuous mental factors like anger, attachment, and so on. They're not taking over your mind and controlling your behavior. So your non-virtue is more under control. And then effort, or joyous effort, we could say, joyous effort to practice becomes easier. So we don't have this negative energy, negative afflictive states of mind blocking us from practicing. So it's easier to practice. So that's the effort awakening factor. And the last line of that says, this awakening factor stabilizes renunciation so we can quickly attain enlightenment. So that's, for someone who wants to attain nirvana, they need strong renunciation of samsara, not wanting to have anything to do with samsara, just wanting to get out of samsara and attain liberation. But for bodhisattva, it would also be wanting to attain not just one's own liberation from samsara, but full enlightenment, to be able to help all other sentient beings be free of samsara. And then number 4, joy awakening factor. So these kind of, follow on from each other. So the earlier one leads to the next one. So after effort, with number 3, one is putting a lot more effort into practice. So it says, as effort flows more easily, the mind becomes focused and more pure and joyful. So there's a lot more joy in the mind as a result of the practice that one is doing. More purity, more focused. So this awakening factor, joy, keeps the mind always happy. You don't get grumpy, cranky, grouchy, depressed. So that's, yeah, when there's more joy in the mind, then it's easier to practice. You have more enthusiasm to practice. And so it says it benefits both the body and the mind. But there's a danger. Joy can be a little bit tricky. And so the next awakening factor is pliancy. It says, when joy subsides, bliss and pliancy arise. So joy, the fourth one, can cause the mind to be somewhat agitated and imbalanced, like a little bit too excited. And there's also danger that you can get attached to that feeling of joy. And so a practitioner needs to recognize these dangers, these risks, and let go of attachment to joy and keep bringing the mind back to the meditation object. So I guess with too much joy, the mind will, wander away from the object. So the person has to recognize that and keep bringing the mind back to the object. And then it says joy will settle down, where we can kind of subside a bit. And then bliss arises. And this bliss is a more calm and peaceful experience, so that the mind is not so agitated and it's able to remain on the object, remain calm and settled on the object. And then as a result of that, pliancy arises. So pliancy is another of the virtuous mental factors, and it occurs as a result of concentration, like in the explanation of how to develop serenity or calm abiding. Pliancy arises. They say it can start to arise a little bit as you're progressing on the 9 stages, but it's only at the higher levels, like the 9th stage, that you really experience pliancy, and it can be physical and mental. So the body, yeah. It says here, this awakening factor of pliancy removes discomfort and unserviceability, so the body and mind become flexible, blissful, and capable of engaging in virtue. So it said that with pliancy, your body and mind both feel really light, flexible, and it's really easy to use your body and mind to do the things you want to do, virtuous things, of course, by that time. So you don't have so many, I guess you don't have aches and pains and tiredness and other things that happen to us that make it hard to practice and engage in virtue. And say you even feel like you could fly. Your body feels as light as cotton, like it could just fly away. Sounds really cool. And when this is like this pliancy awakening factor, I mean, it could occur, pliancy can occur in anybody who's practicing concentration, developing single point of concentration. But in the case of an awakening factor, this is in the mind of an Arya, and so it would be free of affliction. It wouldn't be afflicted, whereas in an ordinary person, there could still be some afflictions like attachment. Okay, we've got 2 more to go. Next one, number 6, concentration awakening factor. So following the previous one, pliancy, pliancy deepens concentration. So with pliancy, it's really easy to keep your mind focused for long periods of time without getting tired and experiencing other kinds of obstacles. So your concentration gets deeper. And then it says, this awakening factor abides single-pointedly on a chosen object of meditation, enabling us to fulfill all our wishes by developing awakened qualities. In an Arya's continuum, it is without affliction, and when combined with wisdom, it abandons afflictions. So one's concentration, which one has been developing gradually along the way, is now very, very, very strong. You can keep it focused on your object of meditation. For example, emptiness. You could focus on emptiness and just keep your mind focused on emptiness as long as you want, without any distractions. And that will enable you to abandon afflictions and make progress further along the path to one's goal, enlightenment. Okay, the seventh one, equanimity, awakening factor. So you were asking about equanimity. The term equanimity has different meanings. It can refer to different things. For example, the four immeasurables, one of the four immeasurables is equanimity, and there it refers to being free of strong feelings of liking and disliking, or attachment and aversion towards other people. So that's a more balanced attitude towards people and living beings. That's not the meaning of this equanimity here. Another way that the term equanimity is used is in the feelings. There's three types of feelings: pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings, and the third type of feeling, which is neither pleasant nor unpleasant. Sometimes it's called neutral feeling, sometimes it's called equanimity feeling. So it's just neither pleasant nor unpleasant. So again, that's not what's meant here. So here, this meaning of equanimity is a virtuous mental factor. So it's one of the 11 virtuous mental factors. And it arises when one is cultivating calm abiding at a later stage of calm abiding. It's described here. It says, as concentration deepens, equanimity becomes prominent. It observes the meditation object unwaveringly. So it's able to stay in a very stable way, focused on the meditation object without wavering. And it frees the mind from faults like restlessness and laxity. So those are two of the main hindrances to concentration: restlessness or excitement. Mine is running off to objects of attachment, and laxity is a kind of sinking, not a bright, alert, vivid state of mind. So equanimity is free of those kinds of faults and free of distraction, so it's able to keep the mind on the object. And then the last sentence says, this awakening factor enables us to adopt what is to be practiced and avoid what is to be abandoned. I guess because it's able to keep the mind focused on whatever object you want to keep your mind focused on without being distracted elsewhere. So if you say, okay, I want to overcome anger, I want to get rid of my anger, so you can keep your mind focused on whatever remedy you're using to overcome anger. So it enables one to really abandon afflictions and develop the things that we want to develop. Is that clear, Annabelle? Yeah, the term equanimity can be a little complicated because it means different things. So that's a relatively brief overview of the 7 awakening factors. Like I say, there's a lot more information in different sources. Like in Joseph Goldstein's book, which is called Mindfulness, he has a whole chapter on each of these awakening factors, really goes into detail. But yeah, so if you want to know more about them, that's one source. I had one more slide we can just look at quickly. It's something I found in Jetson Shoki Gelson's text, his commentary to the Ornament, and he's quoting a passage from the Ornament of Mahayana Sutras. This is one of Maitreya's texts, Mahayana Sutra Alamkara. And it's comparing the 7 awakening factors to these, what are called 7 treasures. Sometimes they're called 7 royal treasures. When we offer the mandala, offering, the precious wheel, the precious jewel, the precious queen, the precious minister, you know those? Elephant, horse, and so on. So these are said to be things that are possessions of what's called a wheel-turning king. So in Buddhist cosmology, Buddhist mythology maybe, they talk about, it's actually a rebirth that one can take. It's a kind of human being, but a very highly attained human being that rules over the whole world system. So it's called a Chakravartin king or Chakravartin emperor. And that kind of king has these 7 treasures, 7 precious articles. And so we can just go through these quickly. It's not something you have to know, but it could be interesting. So the first one, mindfulness, the awakening factor of mindfulness, is said to be victorious over objects of knowledge that haven't been conquered. And this is like the precious wheel. So the precious wheel, it actually sounds like a flying saucer or a spaceship. So it's like a vehicle that flies around. And I guess it's called a wheel because of the shape of it. So it's really huge. And so the emperor, or the king, together with all his entourage and his armies, they're able to travel on this thing and travel all around the universe and overcome foes. So if there's enemies, bad guys, they are able to go there and overcome them. So I guess that's how mindfulness is similar to that, because mindfulness is also able to be victorious and conquer things that haven't been conquered, like attachment and aversion and so on and so forth. Those are the real enemies, the real foes that we need to overcome. I won't go through all of these because I also haven't figured out how they relate. But anyway, the second one, investigation, destroys all conceptions, apprehending signs. Signs, the term sign is often used to refer to true existence or inherent existence, when things appear to us as inherently existing. Sometimes that's referred to as signs. So investigation is able to help us have the wisdom understanding how things are and eliminate seeing the signs of true existence. And that's said to be like the precious jewel, which is like a wish-fulfilling jewel. Whatever you wish for you can gain. So it provides all kinds of happiness and overcome all kinds of misery. I guess, yeah, we can say investigation. Investigation is what enables us to gain the wisdom, seeing the true nature of things, and that enables us to overcome all the afflictions which are the cause of suffering. So, yeah, it's a precious jewel. Yeah, and then joyous effort accomplishes qualities like clairvoyances, and that's like the precious queen. I'm not really sure why, but the precious queen is said to be very beautiful, very calm. She has a very subdued mind, and she has just love and compassion, brings success, guides sentient beings out of suffering. So yeah, we can say joyous effort does that as well. Putting our joyous effort into creating virtue, we will reach all success, all good results, and be free of all suffering. And then joy, fourth one, is mental joy due to increasing the illumination of phenomena. I didn't really find an explanation of that, but that's said to be like the precious minister. And the precious minister is somebody who's totally devoted to Dharma. Everything he does is Dharma and for the benefit of others. Never gets tired, never gets upset, working for others. So he's like a employee of the king, and he's able to read the king's mind and just do what the king wants without having to be told. And he's very wise and skillful. Yeah, so somehow that's like joy. I don't know. Maybe because he sounds like he's very joyful. He's very happy to work for others. And then number 5, pliancy, generates the bliss of pliancy, free of obscuration of negative stains. And that's like the precious elephant. So the precious elephant is very strong and wise and skillful and alert, and never does anything aggressive or violent, very obedient, very peaceful, wise, and so on. So I'm not sure how that relates to pliancy, but anyway, maybe one day we can meet Maitreya and ask him. And then concentration, number 6, that accomplishes all desired aims and dependence on concentration. That's like the precious horse. So the precious horse is an animal that the king owns and is also very wise and subdued and easy to lead around and not wild and crazy. So somehow concentration is like the precious horse. And then equanimity is said to be like the precious general. It destroys objects of abandonment and adopts appropriate qualities. So the precious general also works for the king and never harms anybody. He's completely abandoned all non-dharma activities. Yeah, anyway, I just thought to put those up. It's just another way of looking at these 7. So the 7 awakening factors are somehow similar to the 7 treasures of a wish granting, or sorry, wheel turning king, Chakravartin emperor. Okay, we got a few minutes left if anyone has a question. So maybe next week we can do some meditation on at least one of these 7 awakening factors, and that can help to understand them better and feel inspired, feel enthusiastic about cultivating them, since they are essential qualities for our attainment of enlightenment. So let's conclude with dedication of the merit, the positive energy we've created here tonight, coming together doing some meditation, generating an altruistic intention to learn this subject for the benefit of all sentient beings, and then making the effort to listen, to learn, generate the aspiration to develop these excellent qualities, and so on. So we've definitely created merit, positive energy. And now the best thing we can do with this merit is to share it with others, wishing it will bring all of us, ourselves and others, to enlightenment as quickly as possible, and also for the long lives of our precious spiritual teachers. Due to the, sorry, I'm doing the Abbey way. Okay, due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel of bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Incomparably kind and supreme Tenzin Gyatso, the wish-fulfilling, wish-granting jewel, source of every benefit and happiness in this world, may you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three sublime ones, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. So next week will be our final class in this series, and there's one more group of the 37 harmonies, which is the it's normally called the Eightfold Path, the famous and noble Eightfold Path, which the Buddha taught in his very first Dharma teaching. So it's good to know more about that. It's a big subject in the Theravada tradition, but we need to know it as well. We need to know these 8 things and practice them. So we'll look at that next time. Thank you. Good night.
Honorable